All right, I'm live. I'm getting the show done a little earlier for the English, for my mates in England, namely for Tim Wallace, Sir Tim, as I'll call him. Uh, Always good doing things a bit earlier. I know it's late in England, so I'm going to try to do 7 o'clock as opposed to 8 for some shows, just because it's a little bit earlier for those over across the pond, as they say. It's actually kind of trying to rain here, so you might hear a few unintended sound effects. So I started singing this song called Riders on the Ted. This goes, Riders on the Ted, Riders on the Ted. So you can hear the backdrop going. That's real. And to this song we're born, and to Vietnam we're thrown. If you give that man a ride, you will surely die. Riders on the Ted. Okay, that's all I got. But I have here my Be Kind Whenever Possible bee. I love all things bees, of course. It says, be kind whenever possible, but sting like a wasp when you need to. And thank you to the person that gave me the bee. I love bees, of course. So actually, the main reason for this is I'm dialing in the microphone, and my audio expert buddy's trying to help me do that. We still think there's a bug in the line somewhere that's causing me to hyperventilate, or no, that's not the term, hyperventilate, modulate, upper modulate. I don't even know all the terms, but I tried a few different things today. My shirt's actually doing this weird jigamajoo thing here. This is actually my Ted shirt. I custom made a Braden MACV-SOG shirt with Ted in the green beret and with the MACV-SOG logo that I was also wearing in the past show. But I wanted to finish the Ramparts article. I think what happened yesterday is I just lost my voice. I don't know. I do that a lot. I don't know why, but it just, after an hour talking, it just goes off the rails, and I sound like I've been at a boozy bar with Ted Braden somewhere in Tengao Street in Saigon. But I'm definitely trying to dial it in, but it's getting better, I think, and I'll know more after this show. But I'll eventually get it right over the coming few weeks, hopefully. Dial in the new mic. It's definitely a huge improvement over the old one. There's a lot of shows I did before, a lot of Zodcast. Hey, Mike. Hey, Mary. Always good seeing Mary. Mary's a great researcher. Always good seeing lots of great researchers out there. Love them. Always turning up great stuff. That's what I count on in these cases, because, some of these older cold cases, Cooper, Zodiac, so many, it's all up to the citizen sleuths at this point, because the FBI, CIA, I don't trust them anyway, but they've all moved on. Local law enforcement, they've moved on. Unless something turns up decades later, or some dogged ex-police or somebody just it's been on for decades, or inherits a cold case, and they get they retest some DNA by somebody like Othram, and they get DNA off a cigarette butt that's 40 years old, and figure out the murderer lived in the same apartment complex as the victim, and they pick the guy up. It's every time I read one of those stories, I'm always thinking, man, let this guy be alive. Let this guy be alive. Because I hate it when you start reading how they've identified the killer through this ancient DNA that they picked off a cigarette butt or something, and the dude had died. Because most of these dirtbag killers live that kind of lifestyle. They're heavy drinkers a lot of times. They've been in and out of prison, maybe for another crime or something, or they were killed in prison or died in prison. It's so often the case. So I love it when somebody has managed to stay off the radar their whole life and then get caught. That happened in the case. So really one of the first ones that put Othram on the map with David Middleman, Carla Walker. If you look up the case of Carla Walker, I think she was killed in Dallas, Texas in 1980. If you look up that case, I think the guy's name, the killer, was McCurley. I cannot remember his first name, maybe Joe or something. But I think his last name was McCurley. He was the killer. And this guy was actually a suspect in her murder back in 1980 because he had the same weapon, and he claimed someone had stolen his gun. I don't remember what the caliber was. It wasn't anything really offbeat, but he had owned that type of gun and he didn't live too far from the crime scene. And he was looked at by police, but if my memory holds out, I believe he passed a polygraph with flying colors. McCurley did. And of course, somebody that did a podcast gets her case back in the spotlight somehow. And this person goes to CrimeCon. I don't know if it was one in Nashville or somewhere like that. And the podcaster runs into Paul Holes. I'm sure everybody that follows true crime knows who Paul Holes is, who was very instrumental in catching the Golden State Killer. Of course, that was Joe D'Angelo. But Paul Holes had some interest in trying to find out who killed Carla Walker. And David Middleman reached out of Othram. He runs Othram with his wife, and reached out to Paul Holes and found out they had just one tiny fragment of DNA left in her case. And Middleman said, "Give it to me. I will find out who this belongs to. Please give me that little last just snippet of DNA you have left in the Carla Walker case, because every time you test DNA, it degrades it further." And Middleman said, "Man, give me that piece of DNA. I want it so bad. I will find out who that DNA belongs to." And sure enough, he knocks it out of the park, and they do the genealogy on that DNA. They get it. He extrapolates a sample, literally extrapolates, because what they do at Othram is use degraded DNA samples and they expand them where you're able to do the genealogy trace on the DNA. And they do the trace and then they narrow it down to this dirtbag McCurley, who fortunately was still alive. And of course, investigators show up to his house. He still lives in the same neighborhood, same house, still has the murder weapon hidden away. I don't know if it was in an attic, but he still had the murder weapon that he used to kill that poor girl. And her boyfriend was still alive. Her boyfriend that she was dating at the time of her murder in 1980. And there was a cloud of suspicion over him for decades on the boyfriend, because, it was just, the boyfriend did it. And he was so relieved when they finally found her killer, this dirtbag McCurley. But McCurley was just baffled, that they found him. And because, it can't be me. I think he almost tried to convince himself it wasn't him, but it was him. And police entered his home and said, "Will you voluntarily give us a DNA sample?" And he's there in front of his wife. So, of course, he's going to say yes, because if he says no, he's going to look really guilty. So he voluntarily gives a DNA sample. Of course, it matches the sample that Middleman was able to extract from the DNA he got out of the case. And boom, they catch McCurley. He gets convicted, dies in prison. I don't think he served too much time before he died. But the good news is he had to face up to what he had done so many decades earlier to that poor girl that did not deserve it. And I love it when the guys are still alive, to realize that moment that, man, you're busted, dude. We caught you. You thought you got away with it, but you didn't. And we nailed your butt, dude. It just... Man, and it just took the whole weight of the world got lifted off of the ex-boyfriend who was still alive. Her family got to finally know who the killer was. He did get to stand justice while he was still alive. So I think that's more satisfying when he's still alive. It's great. It's great also when they close these cases, the John Does, the Jane Does, and even if they did pass away in prison, at least they now know who did it. But when the guy's still alive, like McCurley, is just the ultimate, So he's done a lot of those. I mean, the whole company's done such a great job. But man, great. But the Carla Walker case really sticks out to me. It's really put Othram on the map, and ever since, they're the ones wiping out all these cold cases. Jane Doe's, 50-year-old cigarette butts. Man, those guys are just killing it in the Woodlands, Texas. Go Woodlands. Where I hail from originally. Very proud of that place. So I'll pick it up here, even though I might be retracing my steps. I'm going to try to talk a little softer so I don't overmodulate myself. So I will be retracing a little bit of yesterday's reading from Ramparts, which of course is about one only Ted B. Braden. Of course, member of MACV-SOG, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, Black Ops Special Forces Vietnam. This article was written after he serves his time with MACV-SOG in the early years. He's called one of the original 33 at Khartoum. I think that was CCC, Command Control Central, and he deserts Vietnam, and he's goes to the Congo, of course. He gets arrested in the Congo fighting as a mercenary. He's then sent to Fort Dix, and he's serving time in Fort Dix, and he's getting special favors in Fort Dix, like having filtered tip cigars and a television set in his cell, which is unheard of. So somebody was taking care of this guy. And that story comes from the great Hank Birch, a good friend of mine, Lieutenant Colonel Hank Birch, who's still around. Actually, he left a comment on my Facebook yesterday, and I tried to email Hank a few months ago, didn't hear back. I was a little worried about him. I contacted his daughter, and she said, yeah, he's doing fine. He just had a couple of little medical issues that I think are cleared up. So hopefully Hank is still around, and we can re-record Hank's story about his time with Ted B. Braden and overseeing him while in confinement at Fort Dix. But I'll start back off with Ramparts, 1967. Of course, you see the little image up there. That's from General Burnside, who did a little Andy Warhol spin on Ted Braden there. Of course, that's the famous Ramparts photo from the article. So forgive me for retracing part of the last reading, but this part is important. But I'm going to finish the article now. It was at the Carville Bar in Saigon when I first heard they were hiring white mercenaries in Africa. Christmas 1966 was 4 days away. I still hear the storm. I'd been in Vietnam 23 months, had worked with some good men, enjoyed my share of women, probably drank more than my share of good liquor, and had done interesting work. It's interesting to me. He says the word work a lot. But I was fed up. It wasn't the work. Leading a small group of men in the jungle on the prowl to find other men is what I enjoy and I do best. And part it was hassling with chair-bound commandos in Saigon, empire builders, bureaucratic bunglers, and incompetent Vietnamese officers and officials. I love the alliteration of bureaucratic bunglers. Sounds a lot like D.B. Cooper letter number 6. But mostly it was money. I was getting older, but no richer. I was in the business of hunting people, and when necessary, and sometimes when it wasn't, of killing them. That's all right, but it's risky and very often dirty, sweaty work. Like I say, it's a business. But the ones making the good money were the agency boys in their air-conditioned offices in Saigon on Tran Van Dao Street. Only on loan to the CIA, not one of the boys. I was drawing pay as a sergeant first class. I like the first class thing, but it's not possible on $800 a month. Even Al Keller told me that they didn't make enough money. This meant I had to spend much of my time working the black market and the Piastri exchange to turn a buck. However, the mercenaries, I was told, made at least twice as much, more for an officer, with even better opportunities to make $1 on the side. I was already a mercenary, but a poorly paid one. See, he considered himself a mercenary even when he was fighting in Vietnam for the Americans. Like those in special forces who have volunteered for their 4th and 5th tours in Vietnam, I didn't extend my tour for glory, honor, country, only for money. I didn't know who or why mercenaries were fighting, but that's of little consequence to a professional. Getting from Vietnam to the States was unbelievably easy. Then after balling it up over Christmas and New Year's, I departed Miami International and arrived in London on January 7th. A short visit with friends, and it was off to Belgium on the 9 p.m. See, Tim, you had some buddies in England. Maybe some of your relatives. Maybe some of my relatives. Who knows? Who knows? A short visit with friends, and it was off to Belgium on the 9 p.m. boat train from Victoria Station. Where's Victoria Station, Tim? Do you know? Or anybody in England? I had been told that recruiting was being conducted from the offices of Union Minerai de Haut Katanga, the mining union of High Katanga in Brussels. As it turned out, the information was bad, but I was referred to an office where a man did some calling around and told me my best bet was Salisbury, Rhodesia. I arrived in Salisbury on the 13th of January. I checked in at the rather classy Hotel Menkels and then proceeded to one of the 3 bars on the premises looking for information. I was trying to find a lead to Major Mike Hoare, a citizen of South Africa. I think that someone reminded me the name of the Mike Hoare, I guess, movie or the book was called The Wild Geese. If anyone wants to look that up. A citizen of South Africa, the original commander of De Force Toshimbi, the white mercenaries now known as 5 and 6 Commando. 5 Commando is comprised of South Africans, Rhodesians, Englishmen, some Canadians, and the odd American. Remember, some Canadians. That's going to be important later. 6 Commando in Kinshasa, Elizabethville is what it's called now, I believe, is made up primarily of Belgians. Remember, the Dan Cooper comic was Franco-Belgian. It was made in Belgium. About 300 all airborne who act as militia and place guards for Mobutu. Sorry. Mobutu is half the faction that was fighting in the Congo at the time. In the bar, I chanced upon Sis, the Scottish-born proprietor. I no more than made a tentative inquiry about the major when she openly announced, "Oh, you want to contact 5 Commando." Sis was only the first who not only didn't have qualms about discussing white mercenaries, but talked about them as casually as the weather. She then proceeded to tell me that Major Hoare had retired and was living in Durban, South Africa, and that 5 Commando was now under one of his old officers, a Lieutenant Colonel John Peters. Bad news. The commando recruiter had left Salisbury 2 weeks before for Johannesburg and wasn't expected to return. Sis then put me onto one Ralph Hyder, who could be located at the Hotel Windsor bar. He wasn't hard to find, a matter of following a loud voice from the street to its source in the bar. Ralph Hyder holding forth on Ralph Hyder, a clipped mustache which neither hid a mouthful of bad and missing teeth, nor detracted from his mottled, boozy complexion. About 5 feet 10 inches tall and 200 pounds. He had a bulging gut and overall flabby look. Not very encouraging, but he was my only contact. 2 drinks later, I cautiously approached the subject of 5 Commando. Caution was unnecessary. Hyder not only knew of it, he had been in it and welcomed the excuse to expound on his adventures in the Congo. He ended up telling me I shouldn't waste my time with 5 Commando, but should get into a good organization, a new DeForest Toshimbi. He gave me the impression that the 5 Commando days were numbered. It took a little doing, but after about 3 hours, I was able to edge in my background and experience. At that point, he made an open offer of recruitment. The money was right. I would make no less than $1,600 a month. On subsequent trips to the Windsor bar, I discovered Ralph Hyder was only one of 3 people openly recruiting for DeForest Toshimbi in Salisbury. Hyder seemed to be having better luck than the others, and I met 5 or 6 of his recruits, all with prior mercenary experience in the following days. That's where I ended the last one. So picking up on the newer stuff that was not read, as told by Hyder in his Conferes, I don't even know what that word is, but maybe it's French, CONFRES, confers. The plan was, that sounds like something Braden would throw out there just to act intelligent. And he was. The plan was to organize and train a force of airborne mercenaries. The training ostensibly to take place in Spain, probably near Barcelona, to take Katanga by force, kick out Joseph Mobutu, and reestablish Moise Toshimbe. At the very moment, a man from Salisbury was supposedly in Paris picking up the money for the teams and for transportation to Spain. Hyder wanted me to stick around with those already recruited until the men returned. The others had agreed to wait, not caring much about which side they fought for, so long as the money was forthcoming. That's all they cared about was money. They were mercenaries. For that matter, neither did I. But Ralph Hyder didn't fill me with confidence. I reversed my decision and used my time and many drinks to work from him his address of the main recruiting station for 5 Commando in Johannesburg. That's how Braden winds up in 5 Commando. From Saigon to Johannesburg, I traveled and registered as Ted B. Braden. And after I arrived and cleared through for SMUTS International Airport in Johannesburg, I became Joseph Edward Horner, Canadian citizen, born and raised in Windsor, Ontario. Joseph Horner was a real person, a sergeant in Special Forces who was killed in 1965 at the SOG camp at Long Tran when a round from a mortar he was firing exploded prematurely. So here's Braden taking the alias of a real Canadian. I checked my bag at the downtown Central Terminal and took a cab directly to, I can't even say this name, ZYGMERSH, Zygamersh building at 37 Cruise Street in the center of town. At the office number 616, I found the Congolese office. I opened the door to what to be a rather unclean, seedy, apparently disorganized office. Braden was very fastidious, especially back in the day, with everything. I mean, the room he slept in, the way he kept his appearance, everything was neat and orderly. That's just something that was ingrained in him, probably from being in the military since he was 16. It's just something he was into. I opened the door to what appeared to be a rather unclean, seedy, apparently disorganized office. Among carelessly stacked papers and cigar and cigarette butts strewn about the floor, lounged a half dozen men at desk in the process of having tea. I introduced myself to the short. Here's Braden calling somebody short, Tim. I thought you would like that. Here's Braden referring to someone else as short. So Braden could have been too short, or he wouldn't have been calling someone else short. Just saying. But here he is calling a guy short. I introduced myself to the short, paunchy individual pouring tea, who in turn informed me he was First Lieutenant Denny Sheriff, the man I was looking for, chief recruiter for 5 Commando. Although he looked like a man who had once been in good shape, he was anything but impressive. I later learned he was dying of cancer, so I guess Ted felt kind of bad after making those harsh comments about the short, paunchy guy. I immediately asked if it were true that 5 Commando was actively recruiting. Yes, it was true. Then he immediately started firing questions at me. I held his interest with my special forces and airborne experience, and the questioning continued the following day. Much of it was of technical nature to make sure that at least part of my story wasn't a snow job. Sheriff next explained a little of 5 Commando's operation, that they were preparing to move against a known rebel force north of Lake Tagalida. I'm butchering these words, but they're African. If I was interested, I could fill out the application forms and start processing the next day. Photographs, forms, physical exam, my initial impression of lack of organization was quickly dissipated. 5 Commando's office might not come up to U.S. Army line them up, shine them up standards, but it was efficient and thorough. Everything was completed by late afternoon, and Denny Sheriff told me the next step was to meet him prior to midnight at Jan Smut's terminal for transport to the Congo. So he's finally on his way. The airport that night looked like a scale version of Travis Air Force Base, because he knew Travis Air Force Base, by the way. Very important to know about Ted. He was in the Air Force for a while, other than being in the Army for most of his military career, which I think is about 20 years total, but he did 5 or 6 months in the U.S. Air Force. There was no clandestine move. This was no clandestine move. By midnight, there were over 100 mercenaries, and a muster was held right in the terminal by 5 Commando officers and NCOs. Commercial travelers looked on with idle curiosity. By 3:30 a.m., our numbers were reduced to 87, and we started through customs. A word from Lieutenant Sheriff was all that was needed to let me through without a passport. The gray and blue C-118 4-engine aircraft we boarded was without markings. It was flown by English-speaking Belgians. Interesting. There's Belgians again. We landed at Albertville at about 8:30 a.m. When I stepped off the plane, I received quite a shock. The airport hangar setup looked all too familiar. I had traveled 3/4 of the way around the world to get away from a CIA operation, only to end up in the Congo in the middle of another one. It was like I'd never left home. The whole thing had agency stamped all over it. Here, instead of calling it CAS or SOG or CSD, which is all CIA, or Air America, the euphemism was WIGMO, Western International Guard Maintenance Operations. We were met by several 5 Commandos officers, well turned out in American type tropical worsted uniforms with shoulder boards, epaulets, and brown berets with 5 Commando gold crest. While 5 Commando MPs controlled traffic, we were formed up in the rain, loaded aboard an assortment of American trucks. We were then taken into Albertville. I think that's now called Stanleyville, if I'm not sure, not totally positive. I got to look it up again, which is obviously in the Congo, which consists mainly of one long street running along the harbor and railroad track, and belittled in an old colonial home overlooking the town. The same afternoon, we were taken downtown, where we were issued the Belgian Fabrique National Rifle with its standard 7.62 millimeter NATO ammunition and our 5 Commando uniforms. After 2 days of placement interviews, I was marked for upgrading to officer rank pending completion of commando training and an observation period at Nakasila Station. During those periods when we weren't processing, we were restricted to our villa area with its floor pallets and mediocre food. The town was off limits. There had currently been some tension between Wigmo and 5 Commando. It seemed that a major Jacques Cassidy and an agent from Wigmo had gotten into an argument in the Blue Moon Hotel over some amorous adventure, which ended with Jock placing his 9mm between the agent's eyes and pulling the trigger, thereby correcting the latter's impression that Jock was only kidding. Killed the man. The two groups were being kept apart except for business to forestall a blood feud. Later, I was to find out there were other reasons for tensions between the American agency and the non-American 5 Commando. Ted was the only American in 5 Commando, probably the only American ever in 5 Commando. Commando training, otherwise known as squad or small unit training, was conducted at Nakasila Station. Training was a serious business, and even by U.S. Special Forces and airborne ranger standards, strenuous. Forced marches and double timing at the altitude took a toll on the gold bricks and punji, which puts in brackets, pot smokers. Punjis were too relaxed and lackadaisical to be good soldiers. The cadres, CADRES, were from the Rhodesian Light Infantry and directed by Sergeant Major Charlie Berger, a real no-nonsense type. He would have been an outstanding soldier in anyone's army. With the exception of close order drill, which was on the British model, tactical training was identical in every respect with the U.S. Airborne Light Infantry manuals. I would have been quick to note any variation, but it was identical, even to weapons emplacement, fire, and maneuver tactics, all straight from Fort Benning. I never inquired into procurement practices, but aside from the Belgian 7.62 rifle, our other weapons were of U.S. manufacture: 60mm and 81mm mortars, 3.5 rocket launchers, trigger, handheld mortars, etc. It was impossible to generalize about my fellow trainees. They came in all sizes with varying levels of education, including one from as far away as McGill University in Montreal. They're another Canadian connection. They did, however, have certain things in common. Many had served in at least one army of recognized government, and regardless of level of intellect, there wasn't one idealist in the group. That's interesting. They liked money and were willing to subject themselves to organizational discipline to get it. Very important line of this whole article. It was explained to the purpose of this training was to launch an attack towards the Rinzi Valley after one more group of commandos was trained. Intelligence reports had it that 1,800 rebels were holed up in this area, and 5 Commando was to go in on a 3-pronged search and destroy in the valley and wipe out every man, woman, child, and dog. These dudes aren't playing around. They're going to kill for money, and they have no conscience about it. The realistic attitude of the commandos on these operations is, if it's black, it's the enemy. There was a $10,000 U.S. reward for any Caucasian or yellow brought in alive. On the 21st day of the 45 of us who had survived the training were back at Albertville. A message was waiting for me to leave my group and proceed to Kanasha on the plane, leaving in 2 days. Charlie Berger couldn't figure out why I was called in, and Captain Boozman was a little vague, making some reference to Colonel Peters' airborne troops, and issued me a second dress uniform. Passing time with other commandos in the Purple Cow Bar, were joined by a hulk of a man going by the name of Bull. Jovial and likable, the type of man I would have liked to have known better. I never got the chance. Bull, who was the chief of the local CIA complex, was killed the next day when the Land Rover, which he was driving, was rammed head-on by a truck. I mean, this is crazy stuff happening in Braden even after Vietnam. There was no secret in Albertville about the CIA complex over which the late Bull presided. It included intelligence agents, an elaborate communications network, and Wigmo, the air operations. At the airport, an assortment of nationals was supervised by American Wigmo types who were much in evidence as they bustled from plane to plane, their clipped clipboards. Initially, financing for Mi'kmaq was directly from the CIA. Now the money is first routed through the Congo government machinery to make it appear the Congolese are running their own country. They weren't. The CIA was running that war on both sides, of course. And it's also interesting. I believe Wigmo did have a 727, by the way. I remember looking that up. They had mainly these propeller aircrafts, but I believe they did have a Boeing 727 in their arsenal of aircraft. In addition to the C-118, which had brought me to Albertville, Wigmo 5 Commando also had an assortment of C-46 and C-47 transports, Sky Raider fighter bombers, and a B-26 bomber. The later were flown by Cuban nationals left over from the Bay of Pigs exercise. There's a Bay of Pigs connection if Packer's listening. They were reminiscent of our cowboy pilots with Project Delta in Vietnam, down to and including affecting strange costumes and low-slung holsters, real hot shots. I have learned most of these have since left the Congo. It might be interesting to find out what country they're flying in now. I was told by those working that they once had 5 C-130s, but they and their crews were needed to make up for losses in Vietnam. Interesting. When we arrived at Kenesha Airport, instead of stopping at the main terminal, we taxied the length of the strip to the CIA hangar. Here they didn't bother with euphemisms. It not only was the CIA hangar, they called it that. So here's Braden getting out of MACV-SOG, which is CIA run, right back into a CIA run deal, which is kind of the joke's on him in a way. But a lot of people believe the CIA knew Braden was there the whole time and even set it up, which is a second theory on Braden. I had been pulled in to form a special 50-man airborne commando. Mobutu had given the authorization and funds had been made available. I was to draw up a program of instruction, table of organization and equipment, and a table of distribution, subject to Colonel Peters' approval. Remember, Peters took over for Mad Mike Hoare. If I produced, I would be made the organization's executive officer under a British line captain. While the next 7 or 8 days were busy ones, I still had ample time to walk around town and meet both civilians and my cohorts. It was a strange setup, a black country, a black government, and black rebels, and both sides were using white mercenaries. After having puzzled out the problem of deciding which to support, Mobutu or Dushanbe, the CIA settled on Mobutu, an important decision since it's U.S. State Department and CIA money that decides who will have the government. Decisions affecting the country emanate from these sources either directly or indirectly through the government. The number of Americans in the Congo is very small, comprising for the most part embassy and CIA employees. By contrast, the majority of whites in the area are Belgian businessmen, plantation owners, and those from the now nationalized Union Minerais, the Belgian cartel that controlled the wealth of Katanga and therefore the Congo, in much the same way Standard Oil and United Fruit do in Latin America. See, there's Braden knowing about Latin America, which is interesting because it's one place we want to try to place them. The Belgians aren't happy. Despite being the backbone of the business and professional community, they have lost their influence to the few with the money bags. To make arrangements to get something done or to lodge a complaint, they invariably have to see an American to get satisfaction. This is doubly galling since Mobutu has refused to or denationalize Union Minerais, from which all bounty flows, because the U.S. government and CIA are the great foes of nationalizing U.S. corporations abroad. Many Belgians are convinced our operation in the Congo is a heavy-handed plot to force them out so American business can set up as the sole influence with giveaway business concessions. A January conference of American businessmen and Kenesha reinforced this theory. I'm probably butchering that name of that city, but it's Kinshaasa. The Belgians, although under no illusions as to his trustworthiness, see Dushanbe as hope to regain influence in the control of Union Minerais, an arrangement that also meets with approval from their Portuguese friends in Angola. As things now stand, the economy has deteriorated to the point that the Belgians are going broke and thinking of leaving, even though it means giving up their cheap black servants. The CIA comes in for some additional acrimony They or their sub-agents are everywhere, listening, watching, maneuvering, scheming, sowing distrust because nobody knows who's in their employ and who's watching whom. Braden loved that in word employ. He doesn't say, it never says employment. He says employ, E-M-P-L-O-Y. I don't know where he picked that up, but he loves using that word. By indirection, the CIA runs the mercenaries. Mobutu pays the mercenaries with U.S. funds, and he controls the funds controls Mobutu. Aside from money, without which the mercenaries would disappear, the CIA keeps control by owning the air transport, essential in an undeveloped country. All the while, the CIA seems to be interested in getting rid of the mercenaries, giving the Belgian CIA-US business plot. It would be in their interest to do so. My companions in 5 Commando let it be known that by and large, they prefer Toshimbi over Mobutu, not for ideological reasons, but because of personalities. Those that knew thought of Toshimbi as a charmer, a guy you could sit down with and share drinks with in an hour's conversation. On the other hand, Mobutu was so nervous, almost paranoid, as to be unapproachable, surrounding himself with guards. Unfortunately, at the time, the latest contract was signed by Toshimbi's future and source of funds seemed in doubt, especially among the South Africans and Belgians. Most of the mercenaries were in sympathy with the Belgian planners and longtime resident businessmen. The sympathy was probably the result of 2 factors: distrust of the CIA's plans and manipulations, and their low esteem of the Congolese blacks, which they shared with the Belgian colons. From time to time, there were snatches of whispers suggesting 5 and 6 Commando, in whole or in part, would go over once the rebel area was reached. The mercenaries have always been thought of as a necessary evil, an offshoot paramilitary outfits formed to protect white property that were formulated by Toshimbi, who was under no illusions as to the trustworthiness and effectiveness of his own troops. These troops have no motivation, are poorly trained, more poorly paid, are subject to traditional tribal hatreds, and lack even the basic rudiments of discipline. It generally takes a combination of these 3 things to spur them to action. They have to have their heads been out of shape with hemp and booze, of course, marijuana. There must be the opportunity to loot, and immediate threat of organized resistance must be gone to enable them to rape, pillage, and burn in relative safety. Only then can their hatred of the white men be given full vent. Interesting about everything in the Congo interests me. In typical operation, the mercenaries are used as spearheads or shock troops, killing everything that stands in their way. They pause only long enough to loot the bank and move on, then leave the Congolese troops to hold the place. The Congolese complete the looting and killing. By the time the mercenaries return, the troops loot, booze, and victimized, exhausted, have been chased away. When the mercenaries are working for Toshimbi, they loot only the government banks. When they are under contract to Mobutu, they take only from banks controlled by Union Minere or non-government banks. Whoever wins, it's doubtful it will benefit the blacks. The color of the government might have changed, but the white man is still supreme. The Kaffir hates the fear and fears the whites, but moves aside for them as in years past. The blacks are still servants to the whites, even a mercenary private is assigned at least one black Batman. That's an interesting term to use. I've never thought about that before, and I've read this more than a few times. Some of the commandos have 4 or 5 servants. Kaffirs are good workers, and I think that's a derogatory term, unfortunately, so I'm just reading it as a Triton, especially as house servants, better than the Vietnamese. They make about $3 a week, which is much better than plantation workers. If the mercenaries at all are forced out, it will only mean a change in white bosses for the Kaffir. They'll just go work for the CIA and the U.S. military advisors who will follow the pattern has already been set in Vietnam and Thailand. Of course, Ted knew all about those. But suddenly for me, it was all over. The CIA all but tracked me down with the help of Colonel Peters. As it turned out, I would have been picked up even without the desertion charge. While the CIA feels no qualms about hiring and using mercenaries in the Congo, they don't want American citizens joining the mercenaries. The agency wants American mercenaries in their direct employ, such as those used to train and direct those for the Bay of Pigs caper. Secondly, while nobody gets upset if a British or Rhodesian mercenary is killed, it would be embarrassing for the CIA if it became known that an American mercenary was killed or captured. They always prefer to work through other nationals. I need work, and I don't mean driving somebody's truck. Of course, that's prophetic there on Braden's part, because he winds up doing what? Driving a truck. There's a great need for people with my talents, but unfortunately, the CIA is doing the hiring or the others because the CIA lacked the funds to make a contract interesting. Evidently, I'm on the agency's blacklist, and that makes it difficult to contact other employers from this country. Those who can use my help in Latin America are trying to fight using indigenous and foreign idealists, which means no money for the professionals. He wants to get paid as a professional. It's too bad Strasner, Rojas, and Somoza are in so tight with Sam. Notice how he just says Sam and not Uncle Sam. Otherwise, they would pay well. I'd like to go back to the Congo, but I don't think they'll let me. Too bad, because the anti-Mobutu boys are making a bundle. So that's Ted Braden's own words, what happened to him while he was in the Congo. And then the story picks up again with Hank Birch's seeing Ted Braden in confinement at Fort Dix, getting a TV in a cell. And when he says, don't worry, sir, this will all work out, that's when Hank developed a lifelong obsession with Ted B. Braden to this day, because he couldn't understand why this guy was not a particularly high-ranking officer, got treated almost as a general. And Harold K. Johnson, of course, the highest-ranking guy in the entire U.S. Army at the time, makes a phone call to delay Braden's court-martial, of course, and he winds up getting let go with basically a slap on the wrist after desertion from the battlefield, which is unheard of. And in all of military history, I don't think that's ever happened, other than when it happens to Ted Braden when he's let out of Fort Dix by Johnson, Harold K. Johnson. That's just unheard of. Look up Harold K. Johnson, how high up he was. Only the president of the United States could have overridden Harold K. Johnson, and he's intervening on Ted Braden's behalf. This guy that wasn't even a major, and he's got Harold K. Johnson, the chief of staff of the U.S. Army. That was his official role, chief of staff, U.S. Army, pretty high up, making a phone call on Braden's behalf. And the reason they didn't, of course, as we all know, didn't hold the court-martial hearing was the reason given was there was not enough MPs on base to secure the courtroom, which Hank said was a total joke because he looked out his window and said the place was crawling with MPs. So that was obviously just something made up as a reason not to court-martial Braden. So he was being protected by somebody very high up. Of course, we suspect that was General Singlaub. And it looks like Braden's get-out-of-jail-free card lasts all the way up till 1977 when Jack Singlaub gets into it with Jimmy Carter, who's president in 1977, over something. And Carter basically forces Singlaub to retire early as a 2-star general. So that's when Braden's get-out-of-jail-free card basically goes away, because Singlaub was in the OSS during World War II. He did some amazing things. Then he goes over to the Pacific and he rescues all these prisoners. Amazing story. The guy's an amazing guy, General Singlaub, who's also friends with my good friend Al Keller, who I was just texting with a couple hours ago. Knew Singlaub really well. I'd like to get some Singlaub stuff out of him when we interview him again for the new podcast. It'll be great. But Al Keller, if you look at the picture for this video, the thumbnail picture, not the one up here right now, but the thumbnail picture is, of course, Al Keller with Ted Braden in Vietnam and Laos in 1966. And Jim Hetrick took that picture with a little camera he got from the PX that was free by the Army. That's why he said he always got the camera, because it didn't cost anything. They would literally just give you one at the PX in Vietnam. So Jim Hetrick went around snapping various pictures of different troops. That's why we have even the amount of pictures we do from the early days of MACV-SOG, because Jim Hetrick had that camera. But Al Keller actually has the first picture developed from the film from that camera and has it on his wall at home. And I told him I wanted to make a copy of the photo and have him sign it for me. So what he told me he was going to do is take the original off the wall and copy it somehow and then sign it for me and mail it to me. And he said he mailed it to me today. So I'm really excited about getting that in the mail, and I'll share that when I get it with everybody. But, obviously he gave me this SOG puck coin. He gave me this really neat Christmas card that's signed, and just what a great guy. I love Al Keller, man. Al Keller's great. Of course, he was the number 3 guy in Team Colorado. Braden was his team leader, so he was in nom with Braden. And, Al Keller wrote me that nice note. And now I'm going to have a autographed photo of him with Ted Braden in the field, which is going to be awesome. So big shout out to Al Keller. I think he's, man, probably my favorite Green Beret, and I have a lot. Billy Waugh, the aforementioned Jim Hedrick, Leonard Tilley. Got so many favorite Green Berets, but Al Keller is just one class act, and I love the man, and can't wait to get that photograph of him signed when he mails it to me. So looking forward to that showing up, and I'll definitely share it when it comes in. But that is the end of the story for Ramparts. And then I might do another one, just tweaking the microphone. That's the reason I'm doing this, of naval warfare, where it talks about Braden killing the friendly, and some interesting stuff pops up in that article. Like I said, it's interesting because it's supposed to be about the Navy SEALs embedded with SOG, and it winds up being about Braden. Because the more that Ken Conboy found out about Braden, the more he became interested in Braden. And it just turns out that Ken Conboy, who co-wrote the article with another gentleman for Naval Warfare Magazine, is also an expert at 5 Commando. So, and it just happened to be somewhere else that Braden went. I don't know if Braden was the reason he started studying 5 Commando, but I think he's got a book on Mad Mike Hoare's 5 Commando and other things that happened down there in the Congo. But he might be a guy I might try to get on, because I had a few emails with Ken Conboy, really nice guy. But that's it for tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Definitely do some more this soon, some more Yuba County 5, obviously some more Zodiac. Maybe touch on a couple other cases I don't want to let go, like Missy Beavers is definitely one. A couple of disappearance cases. That there was a new one that came up not too long ago. I want to try to tie in like 3 or 4 of these disappearance cases that are so similar to other ones. I think God, what was his name? Daniel, the geologist that went missing in Arizona. That one. Jason Landry, of course, who didn't live too far away from where I am right now, who went missing after leaving college. About, God, now I think that's going on 4 or 5 years, when Jason Landry went missing after leaving college. He goes missing in Luling, Texas, I've been through. Small little town on the way to San Antonio, kind of more, maybe kind of heading towards Austin, Texas. But I want to dig into that, because still no hide nor hair of Jason Landry. It just blows my mind. They found his car. They found his cell phone, wallet. His clothes had been strewn out along this road that no one really lived close to. They searched every pond, drained every pond, to search every house, all the woods within a 10-mile radius of where they found Jason's car that had been slightly wrecked, and they impounded the car. So the wreck couldn't have, affected his head or anything, because it wasn't, a heavy enough collision. So, man, I just want to know what happened to Jason Landry so bad. If any missing person case that's active, I would just love to know what happened to Jason. I know his family hired a private detective. They kind of had his own theory. Guys out of San Antonio. I might try to have him on, because I'm just so fascinated by this case, and he kind of had his own theory about what may have happened to Jason. I think he believes foul play was involved. Maybe they got Jason at a stoplight somewhere in Luling, and then someone else dumps his car out and stages the scene with his clothes strewn down the road, or something like that. But I cannot believe that it's been this many years and there's just no sign of Jason whatsoever. I think he was a pretty tall kid, about 6 feet. No trace of him anywhere. And, this guy's from not far from me, so it's close to home. So that's just one I've got to dive into and find the bandwidth to do a little more on Jason, for sure, coming up in the future. But if you haven't, please subscribe if you haven't already done so, and enjoyed hearing from people I haven't seen in a while, like Anthony Mills. Great show. Always go check out Anthony. I love his heraldry stuff, of course. I love Koto Arms, and he does a lot of stock market stuff as well. Of course, he knows how he got on my radar. He was doing the debunking of the DB Cooper tie antimony stuff, which you were right about if you go back and look at that, Anthony, because the whole Rim Crew deal blew up. I mean, they're not even sure it's antimony anymore. You know, they don't even know. That's the whole deal with the DB Cooper tie. You know, they don't even know that it's antimony. Yeah, man, anytime, dude. I always appreciate when people mail me stuff. Like Anthony mailed me a couple of Halloween cards reminiscent of the Zodiacs Halloween card. I love it when people send me stuff in the mail because it's cooler now because it's not as common. So I always keep everything like this card from Al. Everything people mail me, I keep. Sean Ball, guys that mail me, I love it. I cherish all that stuff, keep it together in one place. I missed some of the comments because I was reading, but he's referring to somebody as short. Any indication of that person's height? No, that's interesting to know, though. I wish I would know that person's height. Short people don't use the short description. That's news to me. I'm 5'7". I'm like Braden's height. Braden was actually 5'8" because Hank Birch, who I mentioned in the show, who oversaw Braden at Fort Dix, stood eye to eye with Braden, both wearing military style boots because Hank was a lieutenant at the time. I think he becomes a captain the year later in 68. And he stood toe to toe with Braden standing up and remembers that Braden was only slightly, what he said, downhill. He used the term downhill from him, meaning just a little bit shorter than him at 5'9". That's a really good indication of Braden's height, other than when he's in the drunk tank or when he gets arrested later in the early 80s, which we know a lot more about due to our good friend. But Hank had said that really early on, and Hank's a guy that's just interested in Braden, not trying to shoehorn him into Cooper or anything like that. Hank's just a guy that loves anything Braden, period. He definitely not one of these has to be DB Cooper guys. If that was anybody, that was Altair, who was Braden's best friend in the early 60s and Golden Arrow's jumping teammate. That guy was absolutely convinced that Braden was Cooper. I mean, you couldn't unconvince Altair that Braden was Cooper. You could try your best, and you could say he was too short, he was this, that, the other thing. Altair wasn't having it. He said he believed with all his might that Braden was Cooper, and Altair's no slack of a jumper. I mean, Altair was the one loaded down with all the equipment, doing experimental jumps, with Braden jumping with him to keep him from spinning, for General Singlob, who later becomes Chief SOG in MACV-SOG, with one of his right-hand men being Billy Waugh, the godfather of Special Forces, who also believed Braden was Cooper. So you have that. But Hank is a guy that was never shoehorning Braden as Cooper. He was just a general Braden guy. If it wasn't Braden, he didn't care. He's still interested in Braden. And he was 5'9", and distinctively remembers standing toe-to-toe with Ted Braden, full standing. I mean, this isn't sitting. This isn't in his cell, him judging. He just remembers standing toe-to-toe with the guy more than once, and his height versus his own height, which was 5'9". So we might get Hank on tape saying that, which would be good, kind of put that thing to rest a little bit as much as we can. It'll always be out there, but whatever. Who cares? It's like I said, Cooper, he's Cooper, or I go to work the next day. He's not Cooper, I go to work the next day. I don't get out of it. Dang it. Find a way to make me not go to work. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. Always appreciate everybody showing up. We'll definitely get some more stuff coming out soon now that things are calming down a little. Hopefully my voice held out. The bee says goodbye. And Corky will show up in the future. Corky's still here. We'll have to pull up Corky. Here's Corky. So I just woke up somebody in France or something, I know, and I'll probably hear about it on the comment section later. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Thank you, Patty, for keeping everything real as always. I'm a believer.